welcome back to Consistently Candid. This time we're just going to do a fun episode, which is the same format as my first ever episode. So I have Max Alexander and Aaron Bergman, and they are going to argue about philosophy while I largely nod along because I don't fully understand what they're talking about. But they're going to explain it so beautifully that by the end I will understand what they were talking about. That's the aim. So we are going to discuss the repugnant conclusion, which they have a slight disagreement about. Maybe I should try and define the repugnant conclusion as I understand it.
We're going to discuss the very repugnant conclusion.
And the very repugnant conclusion as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't even know if we were going to discuss the repugnant conclusion.
No, we're okay with that one. It's been talked about.
But that's the only one that I know what it is. Okay.
Well, you could start.
Okay. Well, I mean, what we should do first is define the repugnant conclusion and also the very repugnant conclusion and explain how they're different. That seems like a good place to get started. So my understanding of the conclusion is like, is it something like if you have enough people that are living like barely net positive lives, that would be better than having a smaller number of people who are living like very happy lives, or something like that.
Well, and like relevantly, this is like, I mean, okay, you can say like a bunch of things, but this is assuming total utilitarianism, which is that you just take like the total amount of happiness, and that's how you say whether a world is, how good a world is, or something. Or this is a standard way in which the like repugnant conclusion comes up.
Okay, so. And so then the very repugnant conclusion, does one of you want to quickly explain what the very repugnant conclusion is?
Well, I just asked Claude. Do you want me to just read what Claude says, because it's going to be like
sure.
Yeah. I say. No, I know I go overboard with Claude, but this is actually a good use case, I think. So the repugnant conclusion is a philosophical idea in population ethics. It suggests that a very large population with lives barely worth living could be considered better than a smaller population with a very high quality of life. Okay, and then the very repugnant conclusion takes this a step further. It proposes that a world with an enormous population living lives barely worth living, plus some number of people living in extreme suffering, could be considered better than a world with a smaller population all living excellent lives. So yeah, that actually wasn't incredibly clear. I think the main image to get in your head is a lot of mildly happy lizards, a huge number of mildly happy lizards, and also a lot of people who are like in extreme suffering. And like, the very repugnant,
it doesn't have to be
that can be good.
Because some people think lizards don't matter or whatever. It could just be like people or whatever still.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Okay. So the crux of it is, can massive amounts of suffering offset massive amounts of value, or whatever the opposite of suffering is?
I mean, yes, it's like, I think it's like slightly clear if you like, or I think usually see it in terms of well-being, like justifying or outweighing the suffering, because it's like instead of the other way around. But I mean, it's like the metric. But like, do you think it's like more intuitive if you say, can we outweigh the suffering such that with other people living good lives, such that the suffering is worthwhile? I feel that's a more intuitive framing, at least in my mind. Maybe it's not for everybody. I don't actually think this is worth talking about much, or probably at all. But I do think the repugnant conclusion is like true in most actual ways it can be applied in the real world. I don't think it is strictly logically implied by total utilitarianism for similar reasons to like the thing I'm going to argue. But let's look at who cares, because it like doesn't have like many. It like probably doesn't have many practical implications. Oh, I think it's true, but it's not like strictly logically implied. It's I don't give a shit.
Can you say more about that? Because I think okay.
Should we just really quickly have you guys just state your positions for the record?
Yes.
I want to go first.
I mean, I think my position is in some sense like weaker than Aaron's, because I can just say I think Aaron is like mistaken about his beliefs or something, or like the implication of his beliefs. I don't have to say, because and like for reasons we can get into, I think there are ways in which Aaron is maybe technically right, but I don't think he endorses the things you have to accept for that to be true. This is my position, is that like he does not accept all the things that would imply what he's trying to argue for, or be
as the kids say.
What specifically is Aaron wrong about?
Oh yeah, that I guess that total utilitarianism does not imply the very repugnant conclusion or the repugnant conclusion, as he's just said as well.
Okay, so like for what it's worth, the standard position is like Max's side, like the standard default orthodox thing. Not orthodox is a bad word, but like I guess consensus is like total utilitarianism implies the very repugnant conclusion. And then I
kind of suck is it's not as satisfying when I prove you wrong.
Yes,
right?
I agree.
Everyone
and
already thought that.
Yes, and luckily for
this
me,
is pretty similar to our last debate, where I feel like it was the same last time, where you had the consensus position, and then Aaron was just doing some like rogue thing.
It's not my fault. It's not my fault. I have correct takes.
No, I like it. It's fun. It's fun. Okay, sorry. Carry on.
Okay, I should. Yeah. So, my thesis is that total utilitarianism does not imply that for any amount of suffering there exists a corresponding well-being that morally justifies that suffering, and that's the I don't know.
I will say I think that is, and maybe we'll get into it, that is meaningfully different than what you've said.
Oh shoot. Okay. What have I said?
That like total utilitarianism does not imply the very repugnant conclusion or the repugnant conclusion. I think what you're saying.
I was hesitant to even say the repugnant conclusion because it's like.
Yeah, I mean, we can ignore that.
It's like a weaker. Maybe let's come back to that. I think it's like worth coming back to that, but not starting with it.
Yeah.
Because like I do think like for most, as I said before, like the repugnant conclusion is like basically true, and largely follows, like largely, but maybe not entirely strictly 100% purely from logic or like from like the meaning of words, like flows from. It doesn't necessarily flow that strongly from total utilitarianism, but it still does in a slightly weaker sense. Okay, you want me to maybe or Max, do you want to start, or I can sort of like give my argument.
I think it's probably best if you give your argument first.
Also, Sarah, just like jump in whenever and yell at me.
Yeah. Okay. No, there will be no yelling.
Okay, yeah. So sadly, I did not do a ton of preparation for this episode, so I'm gonna apologies to our dear listeners. Yes, so instead of going in a sequence, I will give the most important, I think, fundamental take, which is, so I'll just like quote from it because I like wrote it better than I could say it. We have no affirmative reason to believe that every conceivable amount of suffering or pleasure is ethically congruent to some real finite number. And so what I mean by that is that in like more chill terms, there's like there's an assumption, and I claim it's an unjustified assumption, that states of the world can be modeled by the number line, basically. Or states of the world as well as individual parts of it, or like events. So maybe you want to say like -2 is a paperclip, -1 million is a week of torture, and a billion is some very high level of like, well-being, like for some number of person hours or something. And like, taking a step back, first of all, I think this is totally it's plausible. It's not obviously wrong. But it's also not justified anywhere, and it's not obviously right either. And so this is the fundamental reason I think we should be like, wait, there's this like, huge, unjustified, often silent assumption being made here that is not obviously wrong, but also not obviously right. And then why don't I pause there, and then maybe I can get into the rest of what I say.
I mean, I'm already willing to push back on this, though probably not in the ways you'd like. But I don't know if you'd like to finish your argument first, or if I.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So first of all, I think like what I just said opens up the possibility of both the repugnant and very repugnant conclusion not following, because you can imagine that you like take some. Let's start with the very repugnant conclusion. You like take some like large amount of suffering, and then in the like default number line simplistic case, you can just keep adding up. Maybe that's like -1 billion, and you should just keep adding up little small numbers, and eventually, like if you keep adding up real like numbers like in the set of real numbers, like as mathematicians usually understand, which is just like 0.1, whatever, who cares? Then eventually you're gonna get past 0. And if my previous claim is true, then you can get to a situation where no, in fact, I think like the simple way of putting this, like the semi-naive way, which I don't really think checks out in like a formal like mathematical sense, would be like, oh, there can be there can be like infinitely strong or amounts of disutility or like suffering that are like worth negative infinity points, negative infinity like utils. And I'm giving air quotes because I think that's like saying like negative infinity is a way of shoehorning like something closer to the truth into this existing like paradigm of like real numbers. Yeah, so now that I claim we've established, and then I know that's contentious, but I can establish the possibility of these things being wrong. Then yeah, I want to appeal to people's intuition, at least my intuition. Although intuitions differ, but I think yeah, a couple like intuition pumps or examples. I think the most reliable way to form correct beliefs about things like ethics, or I guess ethics specifically, is to try to simulate skin in the game as much as possible. So instead of like taking, even though you are like a philosopher in an ivory tower, there are like better and like worse ways of like, thinking that like get you closer to the position of really understanding and like, in some sense like living in the world that you like. Or like feeling closer or like more attached or like more like open to the actual consequences of your ideas. And so I think it's like very easy to like have this very high level like abstract view about like how like the fact that there's really like large negative numbers and really when you add enough positive numbers and it gets past zero. I want to say okay, let's pretend first of all that there's a universe, and I don't know, say it's 1 billion people or whatever, and like, you are going to live every single one of those lives, and one of those lives is like let's just go with a normal human lifespan, or I don't know, we can round it to 100 for convenience, as philosophers do. Like 100 years of like absolutely brutal torture. Like the work, it doesn't have to be like realistic. It can just be like, conceivable, like something worse than ever existed on Earth. And then I want to there's the question of like, okay, is there any amount of well-being that you could experience in these other lives, such that you would accept like living this life as well? And like for me, the answer is like super obviously not. I like can't claim what it is for other people. So this is in some sense like trying to like elicit a preference. But like I want to say that first, I think probably like I think my sense is that most people will say, no, there's nothing you can do that will get me to accept like 100 years of brutal torture. And then I think there's like a plausible view that, oh, this is just being irrational. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but I do think that the onus, the burden of proof then goes on the other side to say that actually in the skin in the game example, like when push comes to shove, you think that the thing that you actually want to do is in fact like, irrational. I think that's yeah, and I don't see the way of, or I certainly haven't been convinced, and like haven't heard any very convincing arguments that like, in fact this is an irrational thing to do. And long story short, I think this suggests that that yeah, you're getting like something close to the like negative infinity versus whatever large positive numbers case. Because as a matter of fact, like if you were like offered this credibly, like right now, at least if it was me, I would not in fact do that thing. And so I think this is very strong evidence that in fact, I guess I'm premising all of this like on hedonic total utilitarianism, where pleasure and suffering are the things that matter. Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Last sentence. Like all this suggests that, in fact, like the moral value of like all those good lives does not, in fact, outweigh the bad lives, unless it's plausible for the sort of unjustified assumption thing I said at the beginning. Okay, that was a long ramble.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go.
Well,
Max, destroy him. No.
Well, I don't know if it'll be as compelling, probably. I think I like took some notes while you were talking. There's a few things. We'll go in the kind of order of least interesting. That way we save the best for last. But I think as a aside, it's like interesting that just now you distinguish between, would you create a universe where you have to live every life, and then most of them are pleasurable, very pleasurable, but one has suffering. Whereas in your like blog post, you talk about would you undergo like a week of terrible torture for arbitrarily many number of years of like really, really great experiences. Mostly because I think, and maybe other people disagree with this intuition, that the one you've used just now about like torturing a person and then you get to live other lives, you like have to lead each life, weakens your case like intuitively or something, just because there's this clear distinction between entities. Whereas it really feels quite bad if you're like, oh, would you like $1 million or I like stab you and you have to like go through rehab for months or whatever, something like this. That feels like really quite bad. But if you gamed it out, would you like to live one life where you get $1 million? I don't know if this example I'm giving actually.
I mean, I actually okay. It's in. Oh, sorry. Keep going.
Oh, I was just gonna say I think I was like explaining my intuition here poorly, but I'm trying to get at this idea that by distinguishing between lives, it becomes more appealing. But I'm not sure if everyone else feels that way.
Yeah, I think it's like interesting that that is your intuition. I think that what I said before and what I say in the blog post are like supposed to be the same argument, even though I didn't say them.
I agree. I just think that intuition is
like, yeah, and I think you can like play with this and get like more and less, or like different degrees of like intuition. Like one example is like, oh, you're gonna roll a trillion-sided die, and like only if you get the bad roll do you live the terrible life. And I think that is that actually pushes in towards like normal Max point of view, because that's like, I think it's very natural to round 1 in a trillion to 0, and I have that intuition as well. But like then you can like reformulate this as, okay, it's like hard to, obviously humans like don't in fact live multiple lives at the same time, but like you can try to imagine what that would be like. And this is like more compelling. And then I think the most compelling one is the lives in serial. So you actually have to live through whatever it is, a week, a month. I mean, I think the longer, the more compelling. And I think that's actually like fair in some sense to up the amount of time, because like, if you go too short, people also sort of intuitively round it to 0. But yeah, let's just go with like 1 human lifetime of like brutal torture. Like if you have to undergo that first, or 50th, actually, for that matter, I think it's very counterintuitive to say that you would accept that, even though you get to live all these other good lives before and after. Yeah,
I guess. Well, 2 things I'll say. One is that I should say I'm not like a total utilitarian. I don't know if I have, or like it's a view I like lean very strongly towards or something. But I'm like not one in like annoying, whatever. Like lots of people who are annoying about philosophy and never commit to anything. So I will be one here in that sense. The other thing I'll say is I think what you've just said has helped me get at maybe what I'm pointing out, which is something like maybe we have this intuition that suffering can sometimes muddle other things. Like if I were to traumatize you, right, it's really terrible and this impacts the rest of your life. Like intuitively, if you could choose to have like a life that is lower peaks of pleasure, but you never get traumatized by a terrible event, or have these higher peaks, but like you get traumatized, I think like our intuition would be like, oh, avoid the trauma, just because being traumatized has these knock-on effects. And like an analytical way, maybe you could like be like, oh, I've set up the example, so it doesn't matter, but we feel this is the case. And so it's the evolutionary risk aversion that is like well placed, and will distinguish between the 2 hypotheticals you set up. Just because you don't get traumatized if you're living each life, you just live a really, really terrible life, and then the next one you've forgotten it, or whatever.
I'm not sure that the memory thing impacts me very much. I'm like perfectly happy to throw out memory and say, oh no, we're just talking about the experience. Even if memory of some terrible event would make the other good lives worse, I'm like willing to say, no, actually, let's throw that aside or pretend it doesn't, like, not an issue. And like also,
well, I'm more pointing at like why, or at least why I think like I might have a intuition that people would respond differently to these 2 hypotheticals.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I know I'm like jumping in over you. I mean, I think one thing is just in the 21st century, people who like live in like Western countries, like what probably like upwards of like 90% of what is legitimately called trauma is just like not even close to the worst of experiences. And so it is totally plausible. Yeah, I am like perfectly willing to say that like, some amount of suffering actually can be outweighed. The thing that I'm not willing to say is that any amount of suffering, once you fix it, can then be outweighed. I hope this is somewhat clear.
Yeah. So I think, yeah. So I guess to move away from this like side thing we've gone on, back to like, the actual like important part of your argument. I think the kind of like number line stuff doesn't really get you what you want per se. You have to like, take additional things as well. And like the reason for this is like, actually it doesn't matter whether or not suffering and pleasure are like modeled by the real numbers. Like that's not really important. If it turns out you're a moral realist and they're modeled by the like natural numbers, like
the natural numbers have this like same relevant property where like, if you fix any negative natural number, you can add any positive natural number enough times. But yeah, so there are plenty of like, different mathematical spaces that have the same relevant property. But I also think that there are, or like quite confident that there are like mathematical, I don't know if spaces is the right word, or ontologies or something. I guess just models where the addition subtraction thing just like doesn't end up always getting you back to zero or whatever the equivalent of zero is.
Yeah. So I think, yes, that is true, but relevantly is not necessarily in a way that's helpful for you or something. So I think the key thing here or something is that really why the like total utilitarianism like gets you into these really weird situations is that it's like based on trade-offs against like events or like whatever unit you can like, get some unit, and it doesn't necessarily have to be experience, it could be lives, it could be whatever, but like, there is some kind of unit, and these can be like traded off against each other or like totaled. Like you have to have some method of totaling or it's not total utilitarianism, basically.
So I know what you're saying. This is like the most, I think, I'm tentative. I don't even want to say difficult because I think it's like difficult in a technical sense to explain, or not that difficult, but like moderately more difficult than what I have explained. And that probably does lend some credibility to like being wrong. If there's no super pithy little phrase, sentence I can say that like tosses it off. Yeah. So units. I haven't really thought that much about.
Maybe I can like, give you an example, and you can say like,
yeah, sure.
Let's see. So basically, I think it has to be the case that, well, okay, it doesn't have to be. I should be like hyper technical or something. But lots of versions, even the ones you probably want to have, versions of total utilitarianism will imply some form of the repugnant conclusion. Sorry, the very repugnant conclusion. So if it's the case that you can compare and like, total up things, like it can ever be the case that like you could have a world where like you get one paper cut, and also then you get like an ice cream cone, versus a world where none of those things happen. If it's like the case, you can prefer the first one, but you get some amount of suffering and also some amount of pleasure. Like you will get some version of the very repugnant conclusion. Maybe it doesn't feel very repugnant because it's just a lot of people getting paper cuts, but you will get like some version of this. Right?
Yeah, I don't think that's true, and that is because so a corollary of what I claim or have claimed is that the paper cuts don't add up to the torture either. So there's no like finite number of, or like real finite number of paper cuts you can get that are like going to be like morally equivalent to the event that can't be overcome by like positive welfare. And also I feel like just like there's a single counter example, which is like, okay, let's just like stipulate that like 1 year of brutal torture is at this negative infinity. I'm doing air quotes, but let's fine for now. It's actually a fine model, I guess. If you want to have like the real numbers and then we have like one flavor of infinity, I'm pretty sure this actually does work, but I'm not certain. I haven't thought about this a ton. But okay, so we say actually that's not really plausible because you can always get worse. But let's set aside the other sizes of infinity. Let's go with one size of infinity for now. You set that, okay, like 1 year of brutal torture is worth negative infinity. Anything less bad than that can be modeled by some extremely large negative number. But once you hit this threshold, you get to the infinite point. This just like is a counterexample to claim that as long as you agree that what I've just described is in fact total utilitarianism, just a semantic point. But I don't actually, that's like, well, you want to object to that.
I guess I'm like confused a bit on what you're saying. So I think, for example, maybe this is like will help or something. Some versions of like, the very repugnant conclusion do not say like the worst torture imaginable. They just say some amount of suffering. And like, the idea is to get at is that, okay, maybe it's like, all right, if you have this situation where there's lots of like barely worth living lives. This is iffy, and like would prefer to live in the world if I had to be one individual where it's a small number of very happy people. But okay, maybe I can buy this. But then you get into this thing where it's, oh, we have like some very large number of people suffering, and I just feel different about suffering. I think about it differently. And so this finally gets at the idea that like total utilitarianism has some kind of flaw that we like can't get with, because just having a really large number of suffering people and then a really, really large number of people barely worth living, like this is just, I don't know, suffering. It's like weird.
So my sense saying is that oh, sorry.
If you think that pleasure and pain can be compared to offset, where I shouldn't say offset, but that's like kind of the thing what I said with like the ice cream, like you can get a paper cut and then get an ice cream cone, and this way be preferable to one where none of those things happen. That is enough to get you some version of the very repugnant conclusion. And then I said that, and then you were like, I don't think that's the case. So I'm like, here is, like it's just like trillions of people getting paper cuts or whatever is like right below the threshold point that you were talking about where like goes to negative infinity.
Yeah. So actually, I think you might be right that I was just mistaken about how this term, the very repugnant conclusion, is used. Like the thing I really want to stand by is that, and I'll promise I'll adjust your point, because I think you might just be right about that. The claim that I want to stand by is that like total utilitarianism does not imply that like any amount of like suffering can be like morally justified by positive welfare. It seems that like different sources actually just like describe the very repugnant conclusion differently, and like at least one just doesn't stipulate that it is like very, or it just says like very negative welfare, and it's like up to like interpretation as to like what that means. And so yeah, I actually don't. If you want to, if in fact it's like the consensus, or if you want to consider that the very repugnant conclusion is just the claim that large amounts, or I guess let's go with like many beings experiencing negative welfare can be coupled with a huge number of beings experiencing positive welfare, like such that the world is like net positive. I like think that there are amounts of like negative welfare that like each being would be experiencing, such that is true. And so so maybe I'm just like mistaken. I was like initially mistaken about like term.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Or it is like, we could say there are some subset of things you could put in the class of very repugnant situations that you accept, and some subset that you don't.
Yeah. I mean, and like, not that anybody cares about like a specific blog post, but like this, like the thing that I actually like thought about for a while. And I didn't wait. Did I type the words very? No, I didn't actually type the words very repugnant anywhere in the post. So that is my out, or like my.
You didn't type repugnant?
I didn't type very repugnant. Did I type repugnant?
I don't think you typed.
No, I didn't do that either.
To be clear, the reason we got into this or whatever is because for whatever reason, at some point you were like, I don't think total utilitarianism implies the very repugnant conclusion. And then you linked this blog post.
Yeah, I might. Okay, I might.
Which I think, and I was like, I don't think that's true. And
okay. Well, no, I think you might be right. I think I was just wrong about how it's, or at least I was like, at the very least, I was overconfident implicitly about how it was used. I'm sorry, Max. I hope you can.
It's okay
for lying to you.
Well, I recently found out. Again, I think I've known many times and just keep forgetting that I have the philosophy degree and you don't. You only have econ.
I have a minor. I have a minor.
Oh, okay.
Accounts. I don't know.
But then I outrank you still. Then.
Yeah. That's. I guess this is how we decide what's true in philosophy, huh?
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't know if it would be obvious to anyone listening, but it's crazy that I have no credentials in philosophy, which you wouldn't be able to tell, given I've been contributing so wonderfully to this conversation, and I totally understand what's going on.
That's because, like typical men, were monopolizing the airtime.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sarah.
No, I feel like I definitely could have chipped in, but at every time I thought I had something coherent to say, a minute later I realized that it wasn't coherent. And so I've just been like storing half thoughts in my brain, and I don't think any of them are worth saying out loud.
Well, I'd say that's many philosophers are like that. They just say them out loud. This is me demeaning philosophy, as I think lots of them are silly.
I'm confused about Aaron's thought experiment where nobody would choose to endure a year of torture to have how many positive experiences before or after. I understand that intuitively, but also it seems like it doesn't say anything about whether or not the conclusion is true, because even so the weaker thing, the repugnant conclusion, if you asked me to pick, do I want to live in the world with a small number of happy people versus the world with a large number of barely happy people, obviously my individual preference is going to be to live in the first world because I want to be happy, right?
Oh yeah, but that's conditioning on you living in both worlds. that's implicitly that means you already won the lottery of living in the first world. Whereas, okay, this gets into anthropics and like weird things involving like waking up in boxes as Cinderella or something, some crazy stuff. But it's less likely that like a being that considers herself Sarah will wake up in the first world because there's fewer beings.
Well, okay, I think so. Okay, and maybe we should just do this later or something. But to
I see. Okay,
credit,
right.
I think even if you didn't stipulate that Sarah, if you say there'll be no Sarah in either world, or maybe even there'll be a Sarah in one world and there's no Sarah in the other, if you do this sort of, which would you prefer to experience or something, where experience could mean you wake up tomorrow as George Washington or something. I think most people would
live all the lives
the first one. They'd pick the smaller number of really happy people. And this is like why the repugnant conclusion is supposed to be really, what's the word, devastating for utilitarianism is because
my point is, like, people's individual preferences don't really say anything about what on net is best for a collective, right? In a situation where everyone's individual preferences are not being respected, but it's still, if you looked at it in totality, it would still be better than the alternative, which respected people's preferences. Because do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, and like that's why I want to invoke that. Just like say that, okay, in each case, we're gonna assume that, like, you're a being that gets to live all of the lives, and pretty sure, and I want to claim, and I am claiming that, yeah, if you imagine living all of the lives in, like, world A and world B, like, that actually is in fact like an accurate, I don't know, not model, an accurate, like, understanding of, like, what the worlds mean in like some sense. Yeah, this gets into, like, perfect. Oh, are you, like, is it even coherent to consider you're, like, a single being, like, the same? Gets into, like, questions of, like, personal identity being coherent across time. Yeah. So that's one thing. I think, like, one sub issue that Sarah claimed, like, goes away if you just, like, stipulate that you, like, live all the lives in both worlds. The other one is it possible that people are just wrong? And yes, it's possible. But as I said before, I think the burden of proof is on the people who claim that, like, now that you're like stepping inside the frame where you're, like, personally considering, like, what it really means to live, like, all lives in both worlds. I think this is, like, a more epistemically legitimate, more epistemically, like, productive and, like, accurate way to compare the two worlds, instead of, like, refusing to imagine oneself at the ground level and, like, purely trying to talk in terms of abstractions, which I just think like our minds aren't really set up to do. They are set up to imagine, like, imagine, like, different possible futures. Like, is it worth, like, chasing this tiger to get dinner or whatever? And not nearly as good at reasoning accurately about, like, other minds, or like models of worlds and weird stuff. I feel like that was not super coherent. I hope some of that I got across.
Yeah, so you're saying that in order to try and get a better sense of whether or not the very repugnant conclusion or the repugnant conclusion are true, you should imagine living all of the lives in both of the worlds as yourself.
Is
that what you're saying?
Yes, and I guess, like, 99.99%, that is what I'm saying. I guess, like, the slightly better, maybe a slightly better phrasing is just that, like, this is going to set you up to get the right answer in a way that just, like, thinking about it without, as opposed to making a strong normative claim. I don't know, because then we're getting into normative claims.
Wait, but I'm sorry. But if you
no, sorry, I take that all back. Yes,
okay,
yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, no, but if you were to ask me, imagine living 10 extremely happy lives back to back or something, and then you were like, now imagine living 100 barely net positive lives back to back, I would clearly pick the 10 lives, and the fact that I have to live the slightly rubbish life more times makes it even worse, right?
I think if you think that the life worth living is rubbish, then you're mistaken about what those words mean. I actually think this is super common. It's a little bit of a side point, but I think for the repugnant conclusion specifically, people take like the phrase, like, slightly positive life or a life barely worth living, and what they imagine is a life not worth living. They imagine a life that actually sucks. And I'm saying I want to.
No, I'm imagining one that's underwhelming and boring. I'm not going to kill myself, but I'm not. Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
so,
I feel like
I
wouldn't want to do that a bunch of. I don't know. I feel like I would definitely. Well, yeah.
I think, like, the thought experiment, or like the repugnant conclusion is, like, it's supposed to take as a premise that, like, you actually, if the choice is between living 0 or 1 of those lives, it's just like we're, like, stipulating. It's just like a premise that you would prefer to, or that at least a rational hedonist would prefer to live like one of the, like, very slightly, like, worth living lives. And I think this clashes with, like, how we normally use words. And I think this largely, like, this,
well,
in turn,
I will say, so that there is, like, the kind of thing you're going on here, or there's this other alternative, which is, like, what people often gesture at as being a life barely worth living is, like, not correct, and it's, like, a much higher, it's, like, more pleasurable than, like, the music and potatoes kind of scenario.
Yeah.
Which would cause, like, maybe issues for your stuff in other ways, like utilitarian stuff. But this is, like, a thing. Total hedonic utilitarianism often, well, I guess it should be like total utilitarianism doesn't have a thing attached to it about what pleasure is or something. And then lots of total utilitarians, I keep putting words in the wrong place, then add on the hedonic part. And in many ways, this is a thing I think people really disagree with. And this is where lots of disagreements happen, rather than the just like total ordering sort of stuff. It's about I'm a, what's the other terms? Preference theorist rather than a hedonist or something.
No, I think you're totally right. I do want to keep using the hedonic frame, like at one point, like mostly because I think it's true, and secondly because I think the arguments apply across theories of welfare. So I think this is like the most natural and like easy one to talk about. But if you also think that like what it means to like what a good life just means, or what a life worth living means, is to live a life that is in accordance with the virtues talked about in the Bible or commandments or whatever. That is, I think, yeah, the arguments for hedonic utility, the hedonic based arguments will in fact apply to those as well. Just because we're like, I don't know, yeah, we can just like use the term like pleasure or hedonic welfare as a placeholder for whatever you think is true. And I mean, I do happen to think that is like correct theory of welfare. But
I mean, I do think you're like right or something in a technical sense, though maybe not in an overall thing. Your kind of argument about there being a point at which it's, air quotes, infinitely bad to have this experience that can't be traded off again. That actually does matter a lot on the theory.
Oh yeah, yes. That's true. I just like don't have a strong. I just think that's the correct theory of welfare. So that's built into my argument about let's call it the strong very repugnant conclusion, which is like extremely bad welfare or like extremely negative welfare, extremely bad life or whatever. I like haven't thought that much about. I guess you can consider just being like extremely sinful or something. And if you're like really bought into what sin means, it's like the fundamental like worst, it's like a fundamentally intrinsically bad thing. I do tentatively, I'm like thinking out loud, this hasn't passed through like many filters in my brain. I like tentatively think all of my arguments will still apply, but they won't be nearly as intuitive because I don't know. I don't think good at like reasoning. Maybe if you're like a really like skilled theologian who like really buys into like sin as like a real thing, then you're going to be like good at reasoning about this. I don't think I will be good about reasoning about sin because I just like, don't really actually think it's like a legit thing.
Yeah. So Sarah, I don't know. Did this? Yeah. Or yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, right. That's why you're the host.
Okay. God, I'm so to be transparent. I am so confused. I feel like I've got like a delayed understanding where my brain is just catching up to the things you guys were saying about 20 minutes ago, and maybe in 20 minutes time I'll understand what you were saying just now because I'm like.
We do keep like switching things like quickly.
I feel like my brain is buffering.
Yeah. We're also like
this is more of a meander than a debate, but I quite like it.
If you've been in like EA or whatever for a while, or like long enough, like the terms just become very ingrained or something, and so it's very easy for us, I guess, to be like, let's switch around here. Whereas if you're like, this is the first time I'm hearing about this.
I think this is unfair because I actually just did I don't know about unfair in some like really strong sense, but well, first of all, I do still think I'm right, but setting that aside, I think I've just spent way more time. So I initially wrote this as part of like team project thing a couple of years ago. And I don't know, I was like really trying to like, this was like a pretty like serious project, like writing this basically like this, what ended up as this blog post. And so that just like probably makes me like quicker on my feet in some sense, even if that's not deserved, like relative to the actual merits of my
No, I think it's like totally fine that we're not on an equal footing. In fact, I think that's part of the concept.
Yeah, but if the roles were switched, I would be like protesting. I would be like, wait, I haven't really thought about this. I think it's wrong, but I can't really articulate exactly why.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I don't mind. Like I am not particularly knowledgeable or smart about this topic, and it's okay for everyone to know that. Okay.
Can we say that we'll put the Sarah, can we put the link in to my thingy in the description, in the podcast description?
To your blog?
Yeah, to this post.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Right. So if we accepted the repugnant conclusion, then what real world implications should that have, if any?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. It's like, it's like restate. We should be going to very many happy lives. I guess
I don't know,
I
but then wouldn't it be like, oh, everyone should try and have as many children as possible or something? I don't know. Like,
yeah, no, I mean, I think this is like, I feel like, sorry, what I'm gonna say is, yeah, like abstract ethics and what like one intuitively thinks of as like the implications. I feel like often doesn't check out. That, for example, if you think like most human lives are good, like what you might think, oh, we should ban abortion, or we should maximize the number of humans alive right now. I just think those don't follow. That was just an example. I think there's like plenty of other examples. Like sorry, nothing's like jumping to my head, but like,
maybe it's a better way to having had the time Aaron was talking to think about it to answer your question, Sarah, is the reason the repugnant conclusion is so discussed about is because people are like, oh, here's this intuitive way to rank like whether or not a possible world is better or worse. So if we thought about would it be better to make the world like this or like that, is just add up the total number of happiness in each and then compare. Right. And it's like, oh yeah, great.
Sounds like a dubious assumption that's modelable by the real number. Sorry.
Let's just let's just take the happiest world and make that one, right? You'd be like, oh, we've solved ethics. And then somebody comes along and they're like, okay, well, there is the scenario where if you could compare two worlds, one that is the music and potatoes, and one which is the like small number of happy people really having a great time. And like still the case that both of these worlds will be dominated by like the happiest world possible, and that is always the one you want to make. So like practically, if you like accept the repugnant conclusion, it's like still the case that like you're still aiming for like the same thing as you were before, which is to like, bring about this like best possible world. But it is the case you'll like maybe sometimes be okay with trade-offs that at first seem unintuitive. Like maybe, for example, you think like right now the world is or whatever, right?
Yeah, I think the world's terrible right now. I'm being serious. I feel like that's not.
Well, I was avoiding calling it terrible because the repugnant conclusion, and because we got this whole thing about the repugnant versus very repugnant. And if you think the world's terrible right now, then it's not the repugnant conclusion playing out. It's like a very
sorry. Okay.
But yes, fair enough. So assume the world is like mid right now, right? You might be like, oh, what's the point of like disarming all our nukes or like preventing AI from turning the planet into paper clips or something like that?
I think that's a good question.
And then you would be like,
I think it's a serious question, not a rhetorical question. I think it deserves serious inquiry. Not that obviously the answer is, oh yeah, we should just blow everything off. Sorry, keep going.
Well, my point was being like the repugnant conclusion might imply that practically it would then mean that, oh, the world could be like really great in the future, and so even though it's iffy now, in the future it could be like way better. And so we're just taking the total across like all time or whatever. That's a practical way, but like, mostly these kind of thought experiments deal with like, really large numbers of people, and the world we live on doesn't have very many people, so it doesn't matter in the same way. More what's important, I think, if you like thinking about things practically, is the thing Aaron's saying, which is there sometimes suffering that can't be traded off against good? Because like, there is lots of suffering in the world, and like that would be practically relevant if it's the case that the threshold Aaron's thinking of is like 1 week of being in Guantanamo Bay. Like we had that open for more than 1 week or something. So this like really seriously implies things about what we should do in the world.
For what it's worth, I think there's like a very natural thing you might think, which is like what that implies is that we should cause a lot of people to die. And I think that's not true. What it does imply is that you should shut down Guantanamo Bay. And like this is like a perpetual take. People are always terrified of suffering-focused ethics. And I feel like they're always terrified of a really dumb, naive way. Not always, but like almost all the time. Actually, yeah, sorry, keep going and then I'll have another point.
Okay. Could we specify some actual worlds, some actual setups where, can you give me a setup in which we have a very repugnant conclusion-y world? Like how many people are super, like how many people are there? How much suffering is there going on to counterbalance the pleasure? Can you just give me like a scenario? Do you see what I'm asking?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say like current world. Like, imagine you keep adding humans at the current level of American average welfare, who I think probably have positive lives. I think wild animal suffering and factory farming mean that world is not going to get net good.
I guess so. This I think has some interesting implications. I feel like.
I agree. I mean, I think the main implication is that you really want to prioritize ending the things that are preventing the world from being good. You got to get those out of the way first, not necessarily first, but as a priority.
Think the main thing is that you're wrong or something.
Okay.
Okay. But like, I should say this.
The main thing is that you're wrong or something.
I think the main thing is that I'm right.
That was just such a you sentence. Sorry.
Thank you.
Continue.
Happy to provide. So I think, like, before I lose the kind of thread, like, a good thing. So like, you're saying this thing. Okay, give me a second, because I'm just saying really vague things, but I know what they refer to. So you're making this argument about something like, I'm going to take my assumptions like suffering-focused ethics is the case. And then you might think it's the case, right? Then that we should just like blow up the world or something. That's not the case. We should like aim to make it better. Just because the world's really terrible, we should in fact still aim to make it better, I should say. Right. The issue is, right, this idea that the world there's no amount of like happy people you can add such that the world will ever be like net positive or something, right? Because like, how could that be unless the suffering is infinite or something? And I guess
I think like it can in fact be thought of. That is an accurate way to think of it.
But then it means that actually it doesn't matter whether or not you add one life. The thing that happens.
Sorry. Keep going. Sorry. This is a beautiful. This is a classic fallacy.
Well, no. But that's so. Again, I'm doing the thing where I'm like using the real numbers. But again, I could like, get more technical in a way. I think that's still. I mean, maybe I should start that way or whatever.
I have a tweet about it. I'm pretty sure you're about to say.
Okay. Well, it's just that total utilitarianism is basically, I'm going to say, based on this idea of being able to, like, air quotes, like trade off or total up experiences, right? That's in the name. And so if there is some experience that can never be paired with any other, can never be like totaled up or like compared to some other number of positive experiences, like you lose the thing that is, it doesn't matter, right? You're like,
so I disagree. I think you're jumping from like simple number addability to comparability, and that doesn't follow. So I like, one thing I think is true is like you can have worlds that are like net bad, which is such a kind of like a vague thing. It's like, what does that even mean? But setting that aside, yeah. So suppose that I'm right that like, no matter how many like 21st century Americans you add, the world never gets good. I like still want to say that like, okay, if you add a bunch of happy people to like world, you start out with the current world and like world A, and then world A prime is like say the same world but also with like 1,000 like more happy humans. Like that world is better, and like the comparability still checks out. Like the comparability is not going to be modeled by like a finite real number on the left side and a finite real number on the right side, and like an equal less than, greater than, or an equal sign in between. It's going to be like something else, but not that. But still comparable. I actually do think comparability is like, yes, sorry, one very high level abstract point. Comparability is fundamental to utilitarianism or early utilitarianism, not modeling things with the natural, the set of finite real numbers.
Yeah. So I actually have realized, I think you are in some sense right about your point here. The thing is, so if you take certain assumptions or whatever, I'll say as well, it's not very interesting or something. It is one of those things where then it's, well, this is, because the thing is, this doesn't imply anything action relevantly different than if you like, unless you're God, like literally God, this is like the only way in which it's different. Because like, what matters then is, do you start the universe or something, not something about what you do in the universe. Like the set of actions you'll take in the universe are the same as if you bought the default view of of total utilitarianism. Like as long as you have the same like hedonic values.
Well, once you're adding God, I like all bets are off.
Well, but what I'm saying is
I
like,
really follow that. Yeah.
You're like, okay. To your point that like things can't, you don't just use the real numbers or whatever. As long as you can compare universes, like you end up ranking them or whatever, right? And so our current world, you're just doing a semantic thing about, do we call it the universe net positive or whatever? Right. This ends up being the only like.
And actually, I think that's sorry. I think I was a little bit unfair to that. I think it actually is coherent to say like what net positive means is that morally preferable to nothing existing. I think that's actually pretty intuitive.
Or
if you accept some assumption about sentience, no sentient beings exist.
Yeah, but this is why I said the kind of God thing, right? Like we can't have unstarted the universe, and so.
Like, yeah, totally. Yes, I totally agree. There's no like big like sign that says like, if world equals net negative, then actually sorry. Keep going. Sorry.
I mean, I guess I feel like I've got a sense of what your view overall is, and it's the main thing is maybe just how you think about welfare, which is separate than this like other stuff, is like action relevant or something. Like maybe you're not willing to take certain bets. It actually seems like you are, and maybe that's the like more interesting thing to get at is because there's this abstract point that made me go, oh, maybe you're saying something like not that's just like trivially true or whatever, and I'm kind of like back like, oh, this is maybe not so the case. So for example, your like ordering of worlds gets like really weird if you're depending on where the like point where torture goes to infinity or whatever, right?
Yeah, I agree. This is the strongest point against me, which is that then you can have looks like slightly you can add up like things that are almost to that point, almost like the lexical threshold, and it like never pushes over the threshold. I think this is like the strongest argument against my point. I don't really have a response except to like point to all the arguments for me.
Yeah, but
can you? I feel like I don't understand this threshold thing. Can you clarify this?
Yeah. So if you're imagining, yeah, there's like some threshold at which like some amount, like some sufficiently bad like amount of suffering, or like some not I don't want to use the word amount. I want to say like instantiation of suffering, such that like this can like never be outweighed by like arbitrarily like large amounts of well-being. This, I think, a corollary to this is that you take somewhat less bad suffering that's still extremely bad, and you can add arbitrarily. Consider the least bad amount of suffering that is still over this lexical threshold. And what lexical means basically is functionally it means like, this is worth infinity points or negative infinity points here. Like it's not going to be outweighed. And then consider something that's like somewhat less bad, but such that it actually can in fact be outweighed by well-being. Like a corollary of this is that adding up an arbitrary number, so let's keep on counting up, number of the instantiations of like slightly sub-lexical suffering is never going to be as bad as the like over the threshold so bad that it can't be outweighed amount of suffering. And I think this is counterintuitive and just gets extremely hard to think about because I don't know, we're like humans and brains that like aren't good at thinking about the stuff. I think it's counterintuitive.
Right, so if there was a person who was being tortured in a particular way, that meant that it was over this threshold where it was so bad it could never be offset by any amount of utility or whatever. And then there were like 50 people that were being tortured in a ever so slightly less bad way. It would still be like, and then you had to choose which set of torture you can like to prevent. You should save the one person and let the 50 people continue to be tortured slightly less badly than the one person who was being tortured in some specific way, which tips them over the threshold.
I'm gonna say a word, and then you need to listen. Everybody listening needs to listen to the rest of the sentence, not just the word. Yes, but only conditional on that. Look, those in quotes slightly less bad amounts of suffering, in fact, being morally outweigable by well-being. And so
why would it be the case that there's some discrete point where things become not morally outweigable? That seems
that's like a good question. I don't even know if discrete point is like a right way of thinking. Hedonic welfare is like a mysterious thing. I feel like our intuitive model is like, oh, things can just get like gradually like worse and worse. And then I like do think this is like probably close to true. And then you're like, I think I'm stuck with this challenging thing of like, oh, so you like think there's like you like make a really tiny like hardly noticeable change, and then it like flips over the threshold to like pass the lexical threshold such that it can't be like outweighed. And like I think this is like a natural thing to think. But then on the other hand, like if you accept that all is in fact true, what this implies is that that tiny little change, in fact, made the difference between like a universe that's like never preferable, nothing existing, and one that can in fact be preferable if you add up enough good lives. And so, sorry, I feel like this was like I vaguely have strings on what I just said. I don't really expect anybody else followed it. I think the main thing I want to appeal to is the thing that you're probably thinking of as slightly less bad is still bad enough to actually be past the threshold. And like this is similar to like the normal repugnant conclusion thing, where people say, oh, lives slightly worth living, and what they're imagining in their head are actually lives not worth living because of like how we use the word living.
But if the threshold exists, then it must be the case that there's something which is just below the threshold, and so then
yeah,
I don't know, I'm not really imagining any particular thing, but it's not. You see what I'm saying? Like,
well, so I mean, the model that I want to compare this to is it is like negative infinity, and if you want to be technical, we can say like negative aleph naught if you want to use a specific size of infinity, versus any cool, perfect, versus any negative real number. And like the intuitive thing to think is like, oh man, like negative infinity is separated by the largest finite real number, or the largest negative finite real number, by just a tiny amount, and what it's actually separated by is like the whole thing. And I think this like conflicts with a very strong intuition that like experience is just like on a continuous scale. And honestly, I don't really have an answer. I still think, all things considered, I'm like likely to be right. This is a strong argument against me.
Yeah, I mean, importantly,
so you don't think that hedonic experiences are on a scale like that?
So I think no, and the reason. Not at least not. I mean, the word scale is pretty general. Not unlike the most intuitive, like simple type of scale, because what that would imply is that all like amounts of suffering are like in fact like modelable by the like finite real numbers. Like I think that those things are like isomorphic, or one implies the other, and the other A implies B and B implies A.
This might be a stupid question, but isn't part of the premise of utilitarianism like that things can be quantified on a scale? Or if you can't, I don't know if this was what Max was saying earlier, but like if you can't add up and subtract things like that, then aren't you just like not doing utilitarianism?
So I think in real life, a lot of the time you actually can. If you want to compare two interventions, one of which prevents some bad disease in 100 people versus 200 people, the math is really going to be helpful there. In fact, 100 and 200 are finite, are like real numbers. Good. It checks out in that case. I don't think this would be controversial among people who are like really in the weeds of defining moral systems. But it's like probably going to sound weird or sound heterodox. And like that I want to claim what utilitarianism depends on is comparability between worlds.
And another thing.
And other things.
Just that, and the more good the better, basically.
Yes. And also the finite real numbers are like a really good model for a lot of things. For example, like all the stars and like all the stars are all the like planets in the observable universe, and like all the amounts of like matter that can be like made into things, possibly things that can be sentient. Those are all like in the domain of like finite real numbers. Slightly lost my train of thought.
To maybe give some examples here, Sarah. Well, hopefully this will be illustrative or something. So you could imagine two versions of utilitarianism or something. And like the idea would be that both of these are versions of utilitarianism. One says that you can quantify an experience in terms of a number or something, right? So watching a movie, like watching a really funny movie, is 10 or something. And so you can add up things like this, right? If that makes sense. And then you could imagine another version of utilitarianism that says, what is the value of like watching a really funny movie? It's just like, it is better than watching like a mid movie or something. So just like you could put all the possible movies you could watch, and you just put them in order, and then the funniest one goes first, if that makes sense, right? And so the critical difference is that there's no numbers in that version. It's just like this one's more preferable than this one, right?
So I think at a base level, that's absolutely right. But like then the thing you have to be able to do, or not, like what comparability also implies is that you're able to compare watching one really funny movie versus watching or like 10 different families watching like somewhat funny movie like on their own. And so that's where the numbers pop out. Like the numbers pop out of comparability and like pragmatic kind of like real world things. Like you don't, even if in some, what I want to say is like in some really fundamental like metaphysical sense, that there's no, all there is comparability. There's like the numbers are like a tool that like humans add on top of that, and they're like sometimes comparability spits out numbers that like, work well, and that's an example of like, okay, one hilarious movie is maybe we can say the value added by that is we should be indifferent between adding that amount of value and adding 10 people watching a somewhat funny movie, and in fact these are just one isn't better than the other. These are like equally worthwhile, or whatever the term is.
So I will take the opportunity to get bogged down and more technical because this is if we I actually don't think you can find it online unless you went to my college. But if you were to see my published thesis,
you should publish it
from college, maybe sometime. You would know that there's a section that kind of confusingly talks about this, which I'll now do as well. So basically, like the thing where Aaron was talking about where like the numbers pop up, air quotes, is because we're like thinking about this stuff in like too practical a way, which is like crazy, right? Philosophers should never be practical. So the thing is, right, I kind of like comparing those movies, right, is like really how you should think about it is comparing the world where everything is the same except the only difference is the movie you're watching. And so really what we're doing is we're comparing the world where just you watch the movie to the world where like two people watch the movie, if that makes sense, rather than thinking about it as like adding necessarily. And you could have a system that like uses adding or whatever if you wanted to. And so, yeah, I don't know if this very stupidly pedantic point makes sense, but yeah.
I think we mostly agree. I think we agree on like the metaphysics of how numbers pop out of like fundamental comparability questions, I think.
Yeah, I was just saying more about it.
Okay.
So is it like utilitarianism doesn't require that you quantify different experiences in a mathematical way? It just requires that you can compare between different worlds, and you don't necessarily need to have some kind of like sliding scale of experience or whatever.
It would help for figuring out how to compare between those worlds.
Yeah, once you're actually in the real world, like
I was going to say that like
once you're doing grant making at Open Philanthropy, then the math gets really useful.
Yeah, but it could be the case that like God comes down and he's like, "Hey, this is actually just how you rank the worlds properly."
Can I read my really melodramatic line about God?
Okay. Oh, I think I know what you're talking about.
Oh wait, hold on. I won't wait. Okay. Absence of evidence. Wait, sorry. You can finish. Sorry, I cut you off.
I think Sarah was going to say something.
I've already forgotten what it was.
Oh yeah. So perhaps hedonic states really are cardinally representable, with each state of the world being placed somewhere on the number line of units of moral value. I wouldn't be shocked, but if God descends tomorrow to reveal that it is, we would all be learning something new. Okay, I thought that was very dramatic and creative. Thank you.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Though it doesn't really show you're right.
No, I know.
But it is a good line.
Yeah, yes. So actually, I feel
obviously we'd be learning something new.
Yeah, God exists. That'd be cool. Yeah. One point is I can argue for different things that I believe to be true. And the thing that the blog post, the most, I guess the weaker and more likely to be true because it's weaker claim is like pointing out, holy shit, there's this really, everybody is just like going on this default assumption of representability by the finite real numbers. Actually, like maybe there's a less wrong post somewhere that like actually spells out exactly why that's true, but no one sent it to me. And like as far as I can tell, that doesn't exist. And it's like, maybe, but this has potential. This opens up a big range of things. If in fact there's this silent assumption that is actually dubious. And then I do in fact think that something close to suffering focused ethics is true, and hedonic theories of value are true, etc. But yeah, for what it's worth.
Yeah. Sarah, I don't know if you have more. Are there like things that are still confusing, or I shouldn't say still confusing, probably. Are there like things in this like chunk of thing that you'd like to talk to? Because I was going to then bring us back to critique Aaron in a different way, whereas like I think you've been saying sensible things.
I think we should circle back to the original disagreement. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to say that Aaron thinks we should nuke the world.
I mean, I think it's a factually incorrect statement.
There are
Unless you think I'm lying
probably
right
ways you can get out of this. So maybe you will, but I will offer
I mean, there are,
an argument. Okay.
Okay, go
So
for it.
what you've been arguing for is something like, so I'm just going to say 1 week, I don't know. Yeah, like 1 week of torture. That is the point at which it goes to infinity or whatever, for like lack of a better term. So we're just going to say 1 week of torture, right? So basically, let's imagine a world of just like pretty chill Amish farmers, right? I'm just going to say this is good. I don't know. Or the USA. You just imagine the USA. It's like Aaron thinks this is good enough. And then I add one.
I'm thinking front down, or well then. So yeah.
What?
At least the media. I think the median American is probably like a good thing that they're alive for them.
Okay,
like,
I'm going to go back to the Amish thing, even if you
Okay.
think the Amish aren't happy, just because it's like a picturesque example. So
I think
let's just assume the happy Amish, and it's just like an Amish commune, and the rest of the universe is desolate or whatever. That sounds sad, but the point is nothing to interfere. And then I add 1 week of torture, just off to the side. That happens, and now we have these 2 universes, right?
The way you
Yeah.
said that was funny. So just a side order of torture.
Yeah,
A sprinkling of torture.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, it probably does in some sense. I'm going to talk about this in terms of infinities, which is maybe doing you a disservice because you don't have to do it with infinities.
No, I think I know what you're getting at, and
But, like,
yeah, I think it's totally fine. Yeah.
So we have these 2 worlds, right? One is infinitely worse than the other, and like kind of the argument you were giving earlier for not glassing the world is that, well, we can just keep adding like happy lives to it, and then it is whatever. Like we're on different tiers or something. So it's we could compare then the world with 1 week of suffering, an Amish farm, and then we kill everyone because it was like infinite, because we thought we should do that, or the 1 week of suffering, and then we have 1 trillion years of Amish farming. Obviously, the 1 trillion years one is better than the glass everything, and obviously the no suffering ever is better than all of those worlds, right?
Wait, did the glass everything one prevent the 1 week?
No, it's after the suffering.
But then I feel like that doesn't make any sense. If it's after the suffering, you're not doing any good. You're not actually undoing.
Because you're like, but the point is that you might worry about like more suffering in the future or something. It's just
okay.
It's just like a baseline thing to get our. It's not. We shouldn't disagree.
You can make it like 1 week versus 2 weeks.
No. So we're not at that step yet. Because it's a
okay. I think that you made like a really simple mistake that like you don't really endorse. But okay.
What's the mistake?
I don't endorse retroactive justice.
No, I know. This is why I'm not. That's not the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, sorry.
Just
imagine you nuking the world and you're like, this is for the shrimp.
Yeah, I fixed it. It has to save. That's not the point. The point is
sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, can we recap the world? We've got 1 world with a happy Amish people.
Yeah.
There's no torture anywhere. Then we have 1 with the happy Amish people, but someone gets tortured for a week. Yeah. And then we have 1 where there's like trillions of Amish people with the week of torture. Okay.
Yeah. And what Aaron is saying is that the first one is like it's good or whatever, and the second 2 are both like worse, like infinitely worse than the first one, right? Because they have that week of torture.
I don't think they're equal. I think you can still compare those.
But yes,
yeah, they're both like lexically worse, like I guess infinitely quote unquote worse than the first. Yeah,
they're both infinitely worse than the one with no torture, but there's a difference between the 2 that like, and you can compare. Like So this is the important thing. Now we get into the tricky thing, which is so maybe I should start. I'll just fix myself to a assumption like hedonism that I won't say out loud, because you could like. Yeah, there's like 2 cases I can think of, and I will try to go with the first one, which is that like a week of suffering or whatever is like some kind of like unit of like infinitely bad suffering, if that makes sense. I guess like maybe
we can talk about different sizes of infinity.
Yeah, but like, we'll just say this or something, right?
In my view, we actually can. I don't know if like mathematicians are gonna like this, but I claim that if I'm right, we actually can treat like all of naught as a as x, and like how x is used in normal algebra. 2 all of naught versus 1 all of naught versus whatever.
Yeah,
if that's relevant.
I think it is. I think this is If anything, you're agreeing with what I was saying. I was just saying that all of naught equals this one thing or whatever. I was just like fixing unit.
Yeah, I'm agreeing. Sorry.
Illustrative. Okay. So then we could add a second week of torture, right? And so now you get into this thing where it is your ranking goes like this now, or maybe we should do it again. So you have 2 weeks of torture, the like Amish families, and then that all existed, and then you glass it after the 2 weeks are done, and then another world which is 2 weeks of torture, and then 1 trillion years of Amish families, right? So now we have 5 total worlds, and the way it goes is there's 3 different sets. One is the one with no torture, one is the one with 1 week of torture, and then one is the one with 2 weeks of torture, and you can compare within the sets. And you can compare the sets themselves to each other, right?
Assuming that, and the sets being that they both exist, or that there's like a probability of each or something.
You're just like breaking them by preferability or whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
So you can do preferability between like the kind of groupings by weeks of torture, and the preferability within the keeping the weeks of torture fixed, right? And now what I'm saying is we should probably glass the planet under your view or something. Is that every kind of day that a week of torture, every like week that a week of torture occurs or whatever, brings us to a new wrong, whatever, like a new thing that we can compare, right? And like no amount of adding happiness lives can ever offset the fact that we've moved down a rung, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So the fact that factory farming is happening right now, and if you think factory farming is such that it is one of these like rungs or whatever, it's like a thing that is like infinitely bad or something, every like kind of unit of whatever that it goes on, the smallest unit it goes on, brings us down another rung, and then can never be offset. And so it is actually the case. You just need to like glass everything as quickly as possible, unless it's the case that like out there in space is like a torture farm, and if we don't kill that first, we keep moving down rungs or something, right?
Like, I like know what you're saying, and I like, okay, once again, I'm gonna say something, and then I hope everybody will like keep listening to what I'm saying instead of like taking something out of that context. If you do that, I'm gonna be like upset, and it's gonna be like falsely representative of my views. I like kind of like bite the bullet in this like abstract scenario. I also think and that is like very like people can like, take that and like however they want. It's for what it's worth, a little side point. You can create a lot of philosophical thought experiments that like I will bite the bullet on, like something that like doesn't actually make sense in real life.
You're gonna get mugged really hard.
I think it's like for better, not even for worse. At least for me, I am like very pleased that the real world makes it such that it isn't actually what I believed. And that's because there's like a lot of things going on. Like one is so I like address this like in the blog post, but the 2 big risks of human extinction are AI and bio, neither of which look like just turning up or down the dial on the probability that like all humans drop dead. So in the case of AI, like you're like turning the future over to other agent. In the case of bio, like the same, as far as I can tell, I'm not certain about this, but as far as I can tell, this is like the following thing is right. Like the same, like the interventions that like reduce the chance of, like, in your words, like lasting the world, aka like, call that like human extinction or whatever, are those interventions like also reduce the chance of like societal collapse and like almost human extinction. And long story short, the other thing that like I actually don't literally know how people take this. I know I'm like rambling on. Is like, if your theory of change involves doing something that makes you look crazy and evil, it probably doesn't work. In fact, I'm like really sure of this. So if you're like, if you want to convince yourself, yes, like I will bite my bullet like in your thought experiment. And like also, I'm like also very committed to the idea that like I am not going to kill anybody. And like it's like convenient that I can reconcile these, but I think it checks out that I can reconcile them, and I can reconcile them because crazy and evil is not a compelling theory of change.
So I like don't understand, I guess, why I do understand why you would think what you just say. I don't understand why it counteracts the thing I was saying before, because the issue is that every second the world is moving down a rung of never redeemable torture, and like you need to stop that from happening.
Like in your thought experiment, I agree. I think the real world, like, there are like differences provided by the real world. For example, like the likelihood that you fail, the likelihood that there are other sentient beings in the universe that like you could like, I mean, this is like far out there. I'm just like saying this as like a maybe relevant. I'm not like, don't want to make any strong claim, but like maybe there's like rescue missions we can go on to reduce like wild animal suffering in like the next galaxy over. Whatever.
Well, I think importantly, I guess here's a good question. Like, if I gave you a button that would certainly glass everything in the universe and nothing would ever come again, do you think you should push it? The fact that I'm still saying this question, you should have already pressed it.
I might ask. So yeah, now this gets into moral uncertainty, and this is something I haven't thought a tremendous amount about because I don't think it's super decision relevant.
I was gonna so Max, do you think that Aaron's worldview or that Aaron's argument implies that, say, if I had the button, I could press it right now, it destroys everything, but tomorrow there's going to be a button I could press that would just get rid of factory farming because the extra day of torture would be so bad, I would still be morally obligated to press the world destroying button now rather than waiting.
Yeah. Or
yeah,
I can be like a little more pedantic or something to like Aaron's credit or something is like it really matters what the 1 week of torture is or something. And maybe that one day isn't actually 1 week of torture, but there is an amount of time such that he should then like you can't wait or something. And maybe that's like a million years or something. And so Aaron looks like he's coming out on top because it's just like so long or whatever, right? To have factory farming going on. But it is the case that like the thing you're saying that you could press a button today to kill everything or wait one day and just remove all factory farming. You are obligated to press the button today under Aaron's view.
I mean, like you were saying something to my credit, against my credit, I'm willing to like bite the bullet and say like if we imagine just like totally stipulate a really simplified world that doesn't in fact that closely resemble the real world, and plus we set aside moral uncertainty, which I think is also it's like a really convenient but I think also legitimate. Thank you universe for creating this happy coincidence. It's like nice that I can appeal to moral uncertainty and say wait, like irreversibility is like a whole nother thing. Just like, okay, and then you have to think about, okay, what are the chances that I'm wrong? What do the other theories imply? Or is there like some sort of like pre-theoretic like meta framework that I need to like work under? And like I have a bunch of like, escape valves that are all super convenient, but again, I think legit. Lucky for me. Well, if you set all of that aside, I will bite the bullet. Yes, like you are in fact morally, or not even morally obligated, because I don't even think normativity exists. It would be good for you to press that button.
Going on things you've like. I remember you having written and just said before, I think we can get more specific and say that under Aaron's views at the moment, which maybe if you like reflected on them, he would change or something because they're wrong. That's maybe stronger than I think in some cases. But anyway, the thing is that like his kind of views on suffering imply that like this kind of example you gave right now, because I'm like relatively like probably above 50% chance confident that if you like went through everything Aaron says he thinks and you said you can press a button right now that kills everyone, or you could wait a day and get a button that turns off all suffering in the universe forever. And you could even add, and you get a second button, you could press it if you want, and just adds whatever amount of pleasure you want, like however much. He would always pick the doing it today, like killing everyone.
I mean, as like an empirical fact, I wouldn't.
And ignoring moral uncertainty, I should also say, or whatever.
Yeah, as an empirical fact, I wouldn't do that. For a bunch like a mix of like psychological and things I can, and probably I would look at the like moral uncertainty. It's like a not a behavioral fact that I would do that. But if you set aside moral uncertainty and you totally simplify the world and just accept that that's true, then yeah, my theory implies that, even though I wouldn't actually do it in real life.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, I really do want to. It's like very convenient, but I do want to emphasize that. I don't know. I feel like suffering focused people are like not at all the actual like the caricature that like you can invent them if you like take some amount of like some like particularly like strong claims.
I want to say something, which is that I think maybe you could do different versions of suffering focused. Well, not I think, like you can or whatever. But like importantly here is like you are like kind of, well, maybe the thing you were that I interrupted you on is to say that, oh, we're all weirdos, but like, you get a bad rap for being a weirdo. But I was gonna say you have a one weird version of suffering focused ethics, and there are like other versions one could do. And some of them just look more natural. Like some of them are just the claims about what hedonic states look like or something, where it's like really terrible or something. If you get what I'm saying. But anyway, maybe I interrupt you unnecessarily.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. Like I know this is like repetitive at this point, but I just like really want to emphasize that there are really like significant and like meaningful and important and like extremely action relevant differences between with like thought experiment that you were just dreaming up, which I think is fine. I'm pro thought experiment and the real world. And yes,
I think so. Okay, I will say there's the escape thing that lots of people do in ethics, which is good. Probably, I think more highly of you if you do this in some sense. Which is, if my view implies I should go steal some nukes, I probably have made some kind of mistake. Which is maybe just about my EV of different actions. Stealing nukes often doesn't work or whatever. rather than whether or not I should do it if I could. But it would be really weird if kind of this thing I'm getting at doesn't actually imply some radically different stuff that maybe often means you should be like really inching towards getting rid of as much.
Yeah, I agree it implies some radical stuff. I don't agree that it implies radical stuff that concerns my actions in the next few weeks or anybody's actions in the next few weeks. Probably.
Yeah. There is this thing where it's the most important thing you could ever do is make sure we like set off the AI that turns the universe into glass or whatever. This is the best thing you could ever do.
I mean, oh man. I mean, there are a bunch of things. I mean, man, boy, do I not trust an agent that really cares about glass and not create any suffering. Like that's like the actual answer.
Yeah. Sure.
And then there's also
or like separates every molecule. So that
I mean, I'm like you can invent thought experiments, and I will say, yes, I bite the bullet on these insane thought experiments. I also do want this is like kind of way outside the box. I also want to appeal to like political philosophy and say, listen, liberalism is not my most fundamental belief. I think it's like pragmatically good in a lot of ways. But behaviorally in 2024, like abiding by the norms of liberalism is like a really strong prior you should have.
The thing, I guess, like I think the thrust of my critique or something that I like want to put on you, which I don't think you really have a good out of, and you're already biting the bullet, except just that I'm like Aaron Bergman and like, I can't do anything about this or something, which like maybe isn't even fully true or something, but it's like literally nothing else matters except whether or not like another week of torture gets added to the universe. Like it fundamentally, nothing else can be traded off against these things. These are the things being traded off against each other. You can like trade off with, if you set that fixed, you can trade off against things, but like, the only thing that will ever like, yeah.
Sort of, but like another consideration is you really better consider the risk that actually your actions are going to result in like a third week.
Yes.
So and like that's like a really serious consideration
but
in the real world where your ideology is associated with like crazy evil people. Like what that might end up looking like is like a lot more terrible suffering. I'm like, that is listen, I know this is convenient and like I like don't know exactly how to reconcile the convenience other than cool. It's cool that it worked out this way. But I don't have to.
Yeah.
What can I ask a question?
Yes.
Why does the torture week have to be infinitely bad? Couldn't Aaron just be like, oh, there are some kinds of suffering or some amounts of suffering which can't be offset by any amount of good? And that could be true. But then why do we have to add this thing that's, oh, the suffering is infinitely bad and therefore that's the only thing in the world that matters? Like it seems like the suffering could just be like pretty bad and it hasn't quite been outweighed by the good. But then that wouldn't imply that nothing matters other than preventing another second of the torture from occurring. Does that make sense?
I will say that I think basically the whole thing I gave with the Amish people, you can just imagine I never said infinite and it still works the same. Like it doesn't really matter. Like the thought experiment still
does
works.
it still?
Because it's just like,
but it wouldn't because
it's just you can never trade off against it. It doesn't matter if the like value sign is infinite.
Yeah, so like I've been willingly using the term infinite as like a nice sort of like intuitive placeholder to just mean what you said. Like been using infinitely bad to just mean it is like a moral truth. And like maybe this gets into moral realism, which we debated like the last podcast with us three. But like it's like a moral truth that like the worlds in which like this thing exists, or like the combination like we torture week like plus like arbitrarily like good things, and like a moral truth like that is just like worse than I guess nothing, or like whatever relevant comparison like you want to have. And like, I'm willing to like, use the term infinitely worse, even though infinity has like meanings in English, it has connotations in English, it has meanings in mathematics that are like technical, it means different things. And I don't think I've studied any like field and like really dealt with multiple sizes of infinity, but like, I know that there's like different technical like nitty gritty details that like you can get into.
So answer your question maybe better or more clearly, something like this, Sarah, is like all that really matters, right, is that you have these tiers and it's like the torture weeks or whatever, and within them it can never be the case that any amount of like anything that you add to 1 week of torture will bring you to 0 weeks of torture. That's all that matters. It doesn't really matter what the week of torture is like valued at, if that makes sense, right? It could be infinite, it could be like,
can I do another cop out? Another cop out is that I'm not actually, I think that I'm right, but I'm not like 100% sure that I'm not even 99% sure that I'm right. I'm probably honestly not even 90% sure that I'm right. And so, yeah, like all things like, yeah, once we're talking about like real action, the real world, like then you get into like, moral uncertainty. And like, I think moral uncertainty is like really, it's like not actually that esoteric. It's like extremely like practical because actually, I'm guessing, Max, you probably think that there's a more than 1 in a trillion chance that you're wrong enough. Is that correct? 1 in a trillion. That's a big number or a small number.
I can't really think in probabilities that small.
Okay.
So it's
okay. I would be very surprised if, I don't know.
I'll just say something like, I can prove I'm right with math.
No, I disagree.
Paper forthcoming.
Yeah,
time to get out the whiteboard.
No, you should. You should. I invite paper forthcoming.
But I'll just say that forever until I die.
Or yeah, I don't know. Like, I wish you had just gone with the yes there, and there's a 1 in a trillion, like at least a 1 in a trillion chance that you're right.
Okay, I mean, you can, if you'd like to, you can pretend I did to continue your point.
Okay, for what it's worth, I think like if you ended up not coming to that conclusion, not all things considered, so not just inside of you, there's this person who's like, you probably don't think I'm like totally batshit insane in general, although maybe you can challenge that. But this person that I'm like willing to like do a cast with, willing to do a podcast with, and I don't know, is like maybe not a terrible person in real life. One probably has like.
Well, I think you're a good person.
I'll have that on record.
Oh, I don't know. Please don't go do anything bad, and then this.
No, I'm not going. I mean, actually, not too long ago, I actually said something mean. Maybe we'll cut this part out. Sorry, I'm sorry to that person. I apologize to them. Sorry.
I hope
I think this person has forgiven me.
Torture. I hope that is.
No, I'm pretty sure this caused a fine item, like an
offsettable amount.
An offsettable amount of suffering, although still bad. Yes, sorry about that.
Is there anything you could say that would be so mean that it would go over the infinity threshold?
Not. I mean, maybe, but it would have to involve other chains of that resulting in other actions in the world. So not just the words.
Okay.
Well, unless
I think this is the challenge.
Yeah. Go out and see experiments.
I mean, causality gets weird. It's what if somebody has like a brain condition, but they hear the word dog and then they're like subject to.
Well, maybe I don't know. This like sometimes I think there's some Joker comic or something where the idea that like, oh, you can just be like it's the joke, the Monty Python sketch, right? You just like you're so good at
the thing that's so funny that it kills people.
Yeah. The joke that's
the funniest joke in the world.
Yeah, you have like paragraph you can spell off, and it's so terrible that people are like, "I'm just like you've broken me completely."
I mean, words this is gonna sound like pseudo profound bullshit, but words actually do result in real. Actually, this doesn't sound that bad. This is very normal. Like words result in things happening. For example, you can order somebody to do something really bad, and if you're like a crime boss or a military leader, so words aren't. Even if the words, you have to consider the results of what you say.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I meant, obviously, words can cause things to happen in real life, but I was getting more at the idea that there exists.
We can ask the person that I said something considerate to, whether they think that what they experienced was like so bad that no amount of well-being could ever be outweighed. I'm guessing they're gonna say no. I'm guessing they're gonna. But
you can put in the show notes, right?
Yeah.
Text this person and see what they say.
They actually they checked after I apologized. They said they actually, you know what, this is very cringe. I'm not gonna say anything.
Okay.
So whatever.
Okay. We've been going a bit. I said I have 2 examples or 2 cases or something. I've actually changed my mind, so I'm going to. I mean, maybe it won't make it into the podcast because that's a kind of a weird place. But I'm just going to very quickly say the second thing, which is just like, you could imagine your system. I mean, there's probably more than 2 ways to make your system, so I'm just offering 2 ways to do it and critiques of them. And so we already did the first one with the Amish people. The second one is, as you were describing earlier, there's like a point at which like it moves over and now it's like never trade-offable again. And the thing is like no amount of like additional suffering like changes this. Like you've kind of like reached the point and now it's just you're fucked or whatever.
No. This is not true. Like you can like torture plus also paperclip is like worse than just torture.
No. So what I'm saying is something like, in the first one, I gave you like rungs of badness, right?
Yeah.
And in this one, there's just 2 rungs, I guess. One is the world where infinitely bad happens and the world where not infinitely bad happens, right? And you can compare within these 2 rungs, right? And so if that's the case, one, you already think we're in the rung where like infinitely bad has happened. And then it's also the case that like trade-offs get messy or something, or maybe just that like the infinitely bad thing like doesn't matter. One of it is well, what if you added like a second infinitely bad, like the same amount of pain that's already happened again, right? Well, like we're already at the threshold point.
No, this brings you to like another tier down.
No, but what I'm saying is like you could construct the system such that tiers don't exist. There's just the two tiers or whatever. And I guess I'm offering a thing. That,
I mean, like
it that way, it, like
you can
work.
stipulate that, but like that just like it's not correct.
Well, I'm pushing you. What I'm doing with that, and why I thought of it first, though I explained it second, was like if we talked about this, it would push you towards this other thing that I then offered a bunch of critiques for. So what I'm saying is that you get like narrowed in on accepting certain like premises, one of which being like tiers or whatever. If that makes sense.
I mean, I accept the tiers. Like, I don't accept that. Yeah, if you add two,
I didn't necessarily think you wouldn't.
Quote unquote, infinitely bad things. Like, two blocks of quote unquote infinite badness is not, in fact, at the same tier as one block of infinite badness. Like, you can create a thought experiment where you just assert that that's true. But then I'm going to say this is not a good thought experiment because it's not true. It's not even true. Like under the lights of like anybody's beliefs, as far as I know.
I did like zone out for 3 seconds, so I missed what you said. But I'll just say that I think you have to take certain assumptions, otherwise you end up with this soup of infinitely bad, which then isn't actually action relevant. If that makes sense.
I don't know. I mean, like we're still like I still have to choose like what to do in the next couple seconds. I don't know. At the end of the day, like not everything's action relevant. Like one still must act in the world. And so I don't know. Like you're not going to convince me that like one thing
my point is that you have to take certain assumptions or something to avoid an axiology that functions like this. Otherwise you get up.
I mean, in that case, like those assumptions.
And you already accepted those assumptions.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Like,
but it is important or something. It means that you probably can't avoid or always get certain things. You've already bit the bullet on those. Is importantly relevant is that you'd have to bite those bullets. Or
I still want you to say that I'm at least a 1 in a trillion chance that I'm right and you're wrong. I think there's like a 10% chance that you're right and I'm wrong. Or maybe even 20%, maybe like 20-80. Or sorry, there's a bunch of spaces where it's like not that simple.
I need to go consult my I have a supercomputer in my basement. I need to go do the math because I don't want to say it's 1 in a trillion.
What's the base? What's the
million? You've had the supercomputer this whole time.
Yeah. Well, it only works when you like calculate more uncertainty things. It's like really not very useful, and only if they're sufficiently not helpful. Like
we can have a manifold market where people can bet on
this is the kind of boxed AGI that we need to create.
Useless. Like philosophy. He says after talking about it for 2 hours.
I feel like we're at some point soon we're going to have to wrap up, and I have to figure out.
Yeah, I'm getting tired. Honestly, I don't like. I'm so impressed by people who do podcasts for. Wait, this was actually 2 hours. That's a long time.
We've been going for This is long form content.
I think it's insane that people do like podcasts. I would fizzle out of existence.
Yeah. I feel like I feel like Aaron is right.
No,
in the sense that.
Or like maybe
I don't
know if it's like for the reasons that he said.
Sorry. Yeah.
Well, it kind of seems. I feel like I think you're like. It seems like you're right, but for a way more basic reason than you said, which is just that. I feel like it seems intuitively true that suffering can be that like the floor is lower than the ceiling is high, or something. If that makes sense. Like suffering can be worse than pleasure can be good.
No,
like
I don't think that's.
Maybe you don't even think that.
I think that is a much more eloquent way of saying exactly what I mean.
No, but it's not. That's not what you mean, right?
It's
because
why? I don't think that's what you said.
Because
no, like
you're talking about trade-off.
It's not what I said. It's like isomorphic to what I said, because what that implies is that like if you have two worlds and like one is like an like there exists a conceivable. So yeah, I'm not sure if like the floor and so actually with a caveat, I'm not sure if there's a floor and a ceiling. That's like a way that you could be wrong. But like, if there is a floor and a ceiling, and in fact there is, once we step out of the range of like conceivability and just talk about like limits in the real world, like there's a finite number of molecules, there's only so many of these things to be arranged. Like actually, in fact, is like a floor and a ceiling to like badness and goodness of experience. Actually, this is like an empirical point because mine is about conceivability, but I think it's like not exactly empirical, but like factually correct that like if you like take like the worst possible experience and the best possible experience, like that world is like much worse than nothing existing, and that is, I think, pretty much equivalent.
That is importantly different than your actual claim. So what
I know. It's a separate thing that I believe. It is similar but separate.
That's what Sarah was saying. That's like the claim Sarah made, and that is not what you think. It is
okay. In terms of like vibes and not super technical thing, like not in terms of like, if you had to round my argument to something that a normal human could like.
No, I think that's
run with
importantly. Because
okay, like, but okay, this is a fact. This is a fact about like psychology and I don't know, like philosophy as a sociological thing. Just I'm like like the wavy equal sign. Like my argument, wavy equals what Sarah just said. It rounds to say what Sarah just said.
Then I'm going to accuse you of something that is terrible among philosophers.
Oh no, what's that?
I actually don't know if that's true, but it's like what you've said isn't like very interesting, right? Which it's either the case that your view meaningfully implies something different than just saying that, the way you model pleasure and pain is not one-to-one. Actually, they're not. It's not the curve mirrored or something, right? That's the kind of thing is approximately your view. And like, if that's
no. You know what? You're actually right about this. I changed my mind. Yes, you're right that like it's one wavy approximate. It's like it vibe associates, but they're not. Yes. It really depends on like how you want to technically interpret like floor, ceiling, and like better and worse. You can make those terms mean technically different things, and then I think one particular configuration kind of actually is at least isomorphic, for like lack of a better word, to my claim, but not in general, just like how those words are like used in English.
Sure,
I'm ready to wrap up. Honestly,
I like how Sarah was wrapping up, and then we went on a whole thing.
I wanted to bring it back around. I feel like I'm pretty sure I agree with Aaron, but also I understood maybe like 60% of the conversation.
You should just update your prior. You should just do a Bayesian thing, which is Bayesian update, Bayesian, whatever.
You importantly just think that you have similar-ish thoughts about how to treat that pain is pretty bad or something. You don't have. I deny that you agree with Aaron. I win this one again.
Well, I agree with him.
I mean, maybe you do, but not for the thing you said.
That there exists some. That there can be suffering which can't be traded off against by some arbitrarily high amount of pleasure. I agree with that part. I don't know if I agree with all the other stuff.
I do think that's my core argument. Or like my core claim.
But that was like the main thing, right? So I feel like that seems.
I mean, like, look, I shouldn't.
Importantly, maybe
on the side where
as like an ending thing, do you think that amount of pain has? Do you know of any things that you think maybe have been that exists in the world? Do you think factory farming meets it, or do you think like some maybe like World War II has had this happen, or do you think we haven't done it yet?
That seems like a separate question. I don't know how to quantify this, or I wouldn't even begin to know where this threshold is. I just feel like I have a sense that it's true.
I mean,
but I don't know. I don't know the answer to the second question.
Independently would count, although it's hard to compare those things against each other. I mean, not impossible, but like hard empirically. Cluster headaches, factory farming, wild animal.
I don't think that we
see the Holocaust. I think these are all
Yeah, but then again, there's also like a timing, because if like someone had preempted that the Holocaust was going to happen and they were like, oh, I should destroy the world right now to stop this from happening, that seems like it still would have been bad to do, because
I think
then we wouldn't have had the future that happened after that. But maybe that just means that the Holocaust does not in fact meet this bar. Like, I actually don't know, but it just seems like there is a bar somewhere. It just seems because I'm pretty sure it is the case. I feel like it's just like experientially, it feels like suffering can be a lot worse than pleasure can be good. That just feels like that's true. And if that's true, then there has to be a bar somewhere. And that's it. I don't have any more.
Yeah, I mean, then you can then you can talk about, oh, this is just like a peculiarity of evolution and biology and like how things shake out in terms of reproductive fitness. But Yeah. Wait. We should be nuanced, and then I kind of want to dip after this. But wait. Okay. So you think I'm right, but I think I'm like 75% likely to be right. What do you guys?
Importantly, maybe I'm gonna say this, and then maybe you can disagree with me thinking this about what you think, Sarah, or something. Is that you agree with some sort of with like a grouping of views, one that like there is some amount of suffering that can never be offset. But this is like importantly different than Aaron, who has like a very kind of specific take on what this threshold is.
Oh yeah.
Like 70% confidence in this. Whereas
I want to
somewhere in this is
let me say like 80% confidence in like my core philosophical thesis, and that sets aside the question of like what actual events would constitute like such a bad thing that it would count as unjustifiable. And like I'm like once you like talk about specific events, I'm like much less sure. And all obvious. I will say though,
then in that case, I feel like I basically just mostly agree with Aaron.
Yeah.
I will say though is that we haven't really talked about that point at all. Like we mostly didn't talk about it. So there's lots of things I could like
I did it with Daniel
to maybe convince you otherwise. Maybe you wouldn't in the end, but we haven't discussed them. So
if you want to do a brief, I'm like
we can.
No,
we can always do a part two.
I think we should just call it.
And also, one thing about this is that I think one intuitive thing you can do is bring up a really bad event, but then it like might be like just empirically or like historically the case that like the counterfactual was also really bad. And so it's like, you could talk about like, for example, like bombing of Nagasaki, but like land invasion of Japan, like also really bad. It's like not obvious which one is worse. Or at least, I mean, I actually think probably the invasion would have been worse, but like, it's not obvious like, a priori just based on what I know about what those words mean or something.
So
there can just be like two really bad options, and both of them have things that would constitute something that was like so bad that it's not justifiable with like happiness.
Bring it to a close.
Thank you.
I will say that if Aaron hadn't been free today, the other proposal I had was to talk much more about theories of welfare and stuff within them, which is what we're getting to at the end. So however many months between the last time we did a podcast and now, sometime in that time in the future, we could do a third episode, and now we've like moved down the chain, if you see what I'm saying. We're like we've done a series or something.
I feel like that one's gonna be
yeah, that sounds fun.
Oh man, that's so boring because that's it's like obviously hedonic. That's just the right answer. Come on.
Yeah, well, that's kind of
not obviously, but like you guys, maybe you two can just do that. I will be like bored out of my mind.
We talked about this a little bit in the first episode we did, didn't we?
Yeah.
Like now that we've done a bunch of stuff, we can circle back, and it's.
I think also like my episode with Just Max. I think we talked about.
I don't remember which one that is. But
yeah. Okay. Well, yes. Let's wrap. As the totally unqualified adjudicator, I decide that Aaron's right. Also, now you guys are 1-1.
That's my best outcome,
that's
right?
Fun. We have to come up with a good.
And the third one can be a tiebreaker.
I want to defend myself and say
has the best takes.
I haven't been sleeping as much the last 2 days.
I didn't sleep all last night.
And so any flummox I've made in this episode can be attributed to that. And I don't know.
I don't think you. I think you. I don't.
But don't go back to the last episode I did and compare my performance or what I was like.
I mean, Sarah is by far the most eloquent person here. So I hope Max, that's not too offensive for you.
That definitely isn't true. Also, if that is true, it's just because I'm saying things that are like easier to say coherently because they're like not as complicated.
Okay, well, like, okay, maybe.
I'm just gonna say the dumb thing, and it's not that difficult to phrase because it's not.
Well, I said this last time, and you actually have really good follow-up questions. Above like certainly above like
always do self-deprecating bullshit.
Philosophy student or whatever. If we had this conversation in front of a bunch of average philosophy students, they probably would just.
Oh, totally. My like intro to ethics class. Oh my god, the takes were so bad, like just way even worse than Max's takes.
Yeah, exactly. I was in his class too. So, yeah. That's a lot.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. Well, we had to round off with me being mean to myself because what would it be if I didn't do that? Great. Thanks, guys. I think we should leave it there.
Yeah. Always a pleasure.